week 17 of the fantasy football season. With fantasy championships here, his tight end starts at every matchup this week. Dallas Cowboys at the Washington Commanders. Jake Ferguson, a fringe option. His numbers have definitely taken a hit over the last couple months since CeeDee Lamb returned to the lineup, where early in the season he was a touchdown machine and the leading scorer at points total at the tight end position. But now the last 4 or 5 weeks, he really hasn't done much. And this offense, obviously, with CeeDee Lamb, George Pickens, and Javonte Williams ahead of him in the pecking order. Even in a good matchup with the Commanders, he's a fringe option. John Bates, Benson Hitt, sits in this one for this Commander team. They haven't done much since Zach Ertz has been out with the torn ACL a few weeks ago. These two tight ends, like I said, even in a good matchup versus the Dallas Cowboys, numbers haven't been there, and they sits this week. Detroit Lions at the Minnesota Vikings. Anthony Firstgood last week got a decent ball game for this Lion team. Obviously, they're down Sam Laporta, who's out for the season. Brock Wright, who's got a neck issue, he's been out multiple weeks and out for the season. But this week, even in a decent matchup at the Minnesota Vikings, have to see more out of Firstgood for him to be a fantasy option. He's a sit. And TJ Hawkinson, a sit as well. He's been a bust this season. It's Hawkinson. It's got to come down to the quarterback play, I say. McCarthy's been banged up all season long. He's been okay in the games he's played. And Carson Wentz, he didn't look great as well in the games he played before he went out for the season with injury. So now Max Brosnan possibly starting this week in a matchup versus the Lions, even though it's his former team. Hawkinson's a sit. The Broncos at the Chiefs. Evan Ingram a sit this week. Evan Ingram really hasn't done much all season long for this Denver Bronco team, and he's bounced around the league now over the last couple seasons, is Evan Ingram. So I know he's had some good seasons under his belt, no doubt about it, is that Evan Ingram. But he's a tight end, like I said, who's been a touchdown-dependent tight end at times throughout his career, and also a guy in this offense where he's like the fourth option as well. So this week in a matchup at the Chiefs, he's a sit. Travis Kelce, a fringe option. Last week we didn't see much from Kelce. Gardner Minshew went out with the knee injury in that game. Now they're down to third-string quarterback Chris Blanton is this Kansas City Chiefs team. And obviously, this team took a major hit with Patrick Mahomes tearing the ACL. So Kelce this week at best, even in a tough matchup where they'll be chasing points, is a fringe option. Houston Texans at the Chargers. Dalton Schultz to start. Last week he found the end zone, and he's the number 2 option in this passing game is Dalton Schultz, and we know he's a good yard after catch tight end. Also, he's a good blocker as well, and he's pretty much in there every snap. So this week at the Chargers, I like him as a starting option. Aronde Gatson, a sit. Gatson, he had a couple breakout games mid-season, and the last few weeks he's taken a backseat where their running room with Amari and Hampton back, they've been running the football a little bit more, and also their offense, their points have gone down besides last week's ball game at the Dallas Cowboys. So all those factors in a tough matchup versus the Texans this week, the rookie Gatson's a sit. Baltimore Ravens at the Green Bay Packers. Mark Andrews, Isaiah Likely's a sit. Mark Andrews, he had a couple decent games early in the season, but at this point of his career, he's pretty much been a blocking tight end and a guy who's going to help in the trenches blocking when they're running the football, where catching the football, he really hasn't been a factor. And also, obviously, this Raven team likes him. They gave him a 3-year contract extension a few weeks ago, but in terms of fantasy football, I think his better days are behind him. Isaiah Likely a sit. Likely had a couple decent games here and there for this Baltimore Raven team, but this week in a matchup at the Green Bay Packers, and last week he didn't do anything, he's a sit. Luke Musgrave a sit. He really hasn't done much filling in over the last month of the season for Tucker Kraft for this Green Bay Packer team. And this week, even in a decent matchup versus the Baltimore Ravens, I don't see him doing much, so he's a sit. Arizona Cardinals at the Cincinnati Bengals. Trey McBride, he's a start. Last week, one of the worst games of the year, it was for Trey McBride, where pretty much they took him out, was this Atlanta Falcon team, double teaming him and making Jacoby Brissett go anywhere else but to McBride in that ball game. So this week we'll see if Cincinnati has the same strategy like the Falcons did, but I think this week after a bad game and a game he couldn't do much as McBride, he bounces back and is a must start. And Mike Gesicki, a fringe option for the Bengals. He's a big target, 6'7", 6'8" in the red zone is Gesicki. He's got good athleticism, but obviously he's a fourth option in this offense behind Chase Higgins, Chase Brown, and then Gesicki at times will go out there and make plays. So like I said, he did find the end zone last week, but this week, even in a good matchup versus the Cardinals, he's a fringe option. Pittsburgh Steelers at the Browns. Pat Freiermuth, Jonnu Smith, Darnell Washington all sits. I know DK Metcalf, he suspended 2 games punching a fan in last week's ball game at the Detroit Lions. But the thing is, these tight ends haven't done much all season long. I know they've had a couple games with touchdowns here and there, and I know with Metcalf out, they might get more involved in this offense. But I think pretty much the only 2 guys who's going to benefit more with Metcalf out in this ball game this week is Jalen Warren, maybe Adam Thielen a little bit, and obviously Kenneth Gainwell, where they can line them up more as a receiver. So this week, all three of these tight ends, where they rotate in this offensive sits. Harold Fannin, the must start. What a season it's been for the rookie Harold Fannin, and pretty much he's the only bright spot for this Browns offense. And obviously on the defensive end, it's Myles Garrett. Besides that, no one's done much all season long for this Brown team. And also Quentin Johnston's now. He's out with a major leg injury, obviously dislocating the ankle and breaking his fibula. So with those factors, this week in a matchup where they're most likely going to be chase points, I think Fannin will go out there once again, have a good game. He's a start. New Orleans Saints at the Tennessee Titans. Juwan Johnson, Taysom Hill are starts. Johnson had a big game last week. He's the number 2 option in the passing game for this New Orleans Saints team. And this week it's a great matchup at the Tennessee Titans. And Juwan Johnson, for the majority of the season, has been a top 12 option at the tight end position. And Taysom Hill, he was playing running back, and obviously his gadget role last week versus the New York Jets, where obviously we know Alvin Kamara, most likely he's not returning this season, and Devin Neal, who was impressive a little bit in a few weeks filling in for Kamara, was the running back there. So Taysom Hill, he had more touches in the backfield than Audric Estime, and anytime you can have a guy at the tight end position and he's getting carries in the backfield, that's a big plus. So this week at the Titans, I think he'll have the same role. He's a start. And Chickakwango, I know he found the end zone last week, but this offense, besides Tony Pollard, I can't trust anyone to start week in and week out for this Tennessee Titan team. So this week, even in a good matchup, and Okwango showed some flashes this season, he's a sit for me this week. Jaguars at the Indianapolis Colts, Brenton Strange, he's a start for me in this game. Strange last week bounced back with a great game at the Denver Broncos, and he's arguably the number 2 target in this passing game behind Jacoby Myers is Brenton Strange. He's definitely been more consistent this season than Brian Thomas Jr. I know Parker Washington, he had a big game last week, but Strange, he's a target in the middle of the field at the tight end position that can make plays, good yard after catch. And Trevor Lawrence and Strange been back in the lineup over the last month of the season. His numbers have gone up, so this week in a matchup at the Indianapolis Colts, where they give up a lot of fantasy points to tight ends, and we saw Kittle last week go for 110 and a touchdown in that game. He's a start. Tyler Warren a start. Phillip Rivers last week, he came out gunning and he was getting the football all over the field. Warren made a few plays in that game. I know his numbers weren't great, but Tyler Warren, to me, he's a talented tight end. He was taken as a top 15 pick for a reason in the NFL draft. And obviously he's going to drop down the rankings this week as Tyler Warren, but still someone in that 12 to 15 range I think you could put in your starting lineup, especially if it's another game where they're chasing points. He's a starter. Tampa Bay Buccaneers at the Miami Dolphins. Cade Otton and Sid Otton really hasn't done much over the last few weeks for this Tampa Bay Buc team. And obviously with Mike Evans and Chris Godwin back in the lineup over the last month of the season, pretty much Cade Otton's been phased out. Emeka Egbuka, even his numbers have gone down. And even in a good matchup this week at the Dolphins, he's not a tight end. I would trust he's a sit-down Waller start, number 2 option in the passing game. And obviously Quinn Ewers, it's his second career start. It's going to be this week versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And the best young quarterback's security blanket is the tight end position. So last week, Waller got off to a good start, and then second half of that game, Dolphins offense pretty much didn't do anything in that one versus Cincinnati Bengals. But Waller, I still think he could go out there, have a good ball game. He's a start. New England Patriots at the New York Jets. Hunter Henry a start. This Jet defense can't stop anyone over the last few weeks here. And Hunter Henry, he's the number 2 option, in my opinion, in this passing game behind Stephon Diggs. So this week in a matchup at the New York Jets, I will put him in the starting lineup. Mason Taylor, if he comes back from injury, he's a sit in this one. Taylor's had some decent ball games this year, but now with Brady Cook in their quarterback, these guys really haven't worked together or had a rapport now. So he will be a sit. And Jeremy Ruckert, he's been in there over the last couple weeks filling in for Mason Taylor, and obviously he hasn't done much to garner fantasy value at all, so he's an easy sit. Seattle Seahawks at the Carolina Panthers. A.J. Bonner a sit this week in this one. I know last week, big touchdown to win the ball game for the Seattle Seahawks, and he's arguably been the number 2 option and most consistent option this season in this offense for the Seattle Seahawks team. But this week, even in a good, decent matchup at the Carolina Panthers, he's a sit. Jatavian Sanders, Tommy Trimble, a sits for me in this one. Pretty much the only guys, like I've said all season long, Tator McMillan and Rico Dotto, the only players with fantasy value for this Carolina Panther team. So this week, the tight end position, that's pretty much been non-existent for this Panther team. They're both sits. New York Giants at the Vegas Raiders. Theo Johnson, a fringe option. Last week, it was a goose egg for Theo Johnson. It's been a solid year for Johnson, but like I said last week, they were scared to put Dart out there and throw the football a whole lot, where he only had 13 attempts. And Theo Johnson arguably is the number 2 option in this passing game behind Wandale Robinson. But last week after a goose egg, and this week I know it's a good matchup at the Vegas Raiders. We'll see if they let Jackson Dart cut loose in this week's ball game. But at best, to me, Theo Johnson a fringe option, Brock Bowers a start. Last week it was a bounce-back game for him. He found the end zone as Bowers, and it's been an up-and-down year for him. Well, obviously early in the season he hurt the knee, and also him and Geno Smith really haven't had great rapport. So it's one good game, one bad game type of thing it's been for Brock Bowers over the last month of the season. But this week, in a good matchup on paper versus the Giants, he's a start. And Philadelphia Eagles at the Buffalo Bills. Dallas Goedert starting this one. Goddard the last couple weeks, 3 touchdowns in the last 2 games. This week it could be a high-scoring game at the Buffalo Bills, where their defense really hasn't been that great, in my opinion. Is this Buffalo Bill defense? They're giving up their points this season. And even last week, Cleveland put up 20 points, and that was a close game, even though the Bills held on and won. So like I said, Goddard the last couple weeks, he's been a big red zone threat. He's finding the end zone, and this week an easy start at the Bills. And Dalton Kincaid, early in the season, he was playing good football, and they were getting them football a lot. But now with James Cook totally taking over in that backfield, putting up some big games weeks on end for this Buffalo Bill team, they're not throwing as much, and Dalton Kincaid isn't 100% as well, I think, where he's dealt with a hamstring injury over the last month of the season. So this week in a matchup versus Philly, where they got to throw the football more, I think, is this Buffalo Bill team. Kincaid, to me, is a fringe option. The Bears at the San Francisco 49ers. Colston Loveland a fringe option this week. Loveland is starting to get things going a little bit over the last couple weeks. And this offense we know is banged up. Roman Dunze, we don't know if he's going to play. Luther Burden, we don't know if he's going to play in this one. And Loveland at least 6-7 fantasy points. Worst case, he's given owners over the last couple weeks. And him and Caleb Williams, they're building a rapport and making plays. And this week in a matchup where they could be chasing points at the 49ers, he's a fringe option. George Kittle, he got banged up after put up a big ball game last week versus the Indianapolis Colts, where he left in the third quarter. He had over 100 yards and found the end zone in that game for the 49ers. If he's out once again, well, they're going to be cautious with him, where they already got a playoff spot is San Francisco. George Kittle, obviously, if he's in, he's a start. If not, Jake Tongs will step in as a starter. And Tongs we saw early in the season when Kittle was out for a month with the hamstring injury. He had some good games and had the knack for the end zone was Tonga. So he's more than capable of stepping in and filling in for George Kittle. So if that's the case this week, I would actually start him from what we saw early in the season and the final game of the week. Los Angeles Rams at the Atlanta Falcons. Kobe Parkinson, he's a fringe option. He's had a couple good games over the last month of the season, is Parkinson. Last week, a non-existent game. It was for him only 4 fantasy points in PPR leagues. But this week, it is a good matchup at the Falcons. Most likely, Devontae Adams is going to be out once again, where there could be more targets for Parkinson, even though Puka Nacua took up the rest of those targets in last week's game and went for 225 and 2 touchdowns. So this week, Parkinson a fringe option, and Kyle Pitts a must start. One of the best tight ends in fantasy football. He's definitely emerged over the last few weeks since Kirk Cousins came into the lineup. When we saw him on that Thursday night game at Tampa Bay, go off for 166 yards and 3 touchdowns. So this week versus the Rams, and coming off another game with a touchdown last week at Arizona, he's a must start. Tight end starts in every matchup for Week 17 of the fantasy football season.